Bite Narratives presents Burt and a Whisper of Cursed Treasure. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Chapter 1: A Whisper of Cursed Treasure. Burt Plowshare, the good-natured, slow-witted farmer, wiped the sweat from his brow as he tilled the soil under the watchful eye of Skully, the talking skull. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the vast expanse of the Grimmdar countryside. Skully, the once mighty dread necrosmith Mortifane the inextinguishable, bane of monarchs, overlord of shadows, bringer of eternal silence, now found himself bound to the oversized skull and forced to endure the simple life of a farmer alongside Burt. Perched atop a fence post, Skully's hollow eye sockets followed Burt's every movement, his bony jaw occasionally opening to offer a snide remark or a piece of unsolicited advice. "You call that tilling? I've seen corpses with more fines," he cackled, his voice echoing eerily through the fields. Burt, ever the optimist, simply smiled and continued his work, the rhythmic thud of the hoe striking the earth providing a soothing soundtrack to his labor. As Burt worked, a group of travelers approached, their colorful clothes and boisterous laughter drawing his attention. Skully, sensing Burt's distraction, groaned and rolled his eye sockets in exasperation. The group stopped to rest near Burt's field, their conversation a lively mixture of laughter and animated storytelling. Burt's curiosity piqued as he overheard one of the travelers recounting a tale of cursed treasure hidden in the coastal town of Bonebay. He leaned in closer, his hoe momentarily forgotten as he strained to catch every detail. The treasure, according to the traveler, was protected by the restless spirits of long-dead pirates, a curse cast upon the gold and jewels to ensure that no mortal would dare claim it. The townspeople of Bonebay lived in constant fear, with mysterious happenings and ghostly sightings a regular occurrence. As the travelers moved on, Burt returned to his work, the tale of the cursed treasure swirling in his thoughts. That evening, as he and Skully sat by the fire, Burt recounted the story to his bony companion. Skully, always on the lookout for a chance to regain his lost powers, perked up at the mention of dark magic and restless spirits. An idea began to form in his mind, a plan that could potentially restore some of his former glory. "You know, Burt," Skully said nonchalantly, trying to keep his excitement hidden, "it might be worth investigating this treasure. I mean, I'm an expert on curses and dark magic, after all." Burt, whose eyes had grown wide with excitement as Skully spoke, eagerly nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Skully, maybe we could find the treasure and lift the curse. We'd be heroes." Skully sighed, realizing he had to maintain the facade of doing good deeds in order to convince Burt. Yeah, of course. Burt, helping the people of Bonebay is our top priority. Now let's make preparations for our journey. We have a long road ahead of us. As they began to gather their supplies and plan their route, Burt couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement at the prospect of embarking on a new adventure with his unlikely friend. Little did he know, the quest for the cursed treasure would be far more perilous than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 2: The Road to Bonebay. Under the cover of darkness, Burt and Skully set out from their humble farm towards Bonebay, their minds filled with visions of cursed treasure and ghostly pirates. Burt carried Skully in a makeshift backpack, using an old burlap sack that he had fashioned into a comfortable carrier. The journey would take several days on foot, and they had packed enough provisions to last the journey. As they trudged along the forest path, Burt began to recount one of his favorite childhood stories. "There was this one time, Skully, when I was just a wee lad, me and my best friend, Will, decided to have a race to see who could catch the most frogs in a day," he said, grinning at the memory. "We spent hours wading through the marsh behind the farm, scooping up the slimy critters with our bare hands." Skully rolled his hollow eye sockets in annoyance, unimpressed by the triviality of Burt's tale. "Fascinating," he muttered sarcastically. "A true testament to your skills as a fearless warrior and future necromancer." Burt, entirely oblivious to Skully's disdain, continued. "Well, as the sun started to set, we realized that we had wandered far from home and we had no idea how to get back. We were scared, but we didn't want to give up on our contest, so we decided to keep going." As Burt paused to catch his breath, Skully interjected with a scoff. "Yes, truly the stuff of legends. A harrowing tale of two young boys, lost in the wilderness, armed only with their wits and a bag full of frogs." Burt chuckled, clearly missing Skully's sarcasm. "I know, right? We were quite the adventurers back then. Anyway, we eventually found our way back to the farm, covered in mud and mosquito bites. My ma wasn't too happy about the state of our clothes, but we had a great laugh about it later. Oh, and in case you were wondering, I caught 20. 3 frogs and Will only caught 19, so I won." Skully sighed, realizing that there was no point in trying to make Burt understand the insignificance of his story. "Yes, congratulations on your triumphant victory. You must have been the pride of your village," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Burt beamed, not picking up on Skully's tone. "Thanks, Skully. It was one of the best days of my life. I knew you'd appreciate a good story." Chapter 3. The Troublesome Treasure. As Burt and Skully continued on their journey, they stumbled upon a small abandoned village at the edge of a dense forest. The village was eerily quiet, with only the wind rustling through the leaves to break the silence. Skully's interest was piqued. There might be something valuable here, Burt." Burt looked around nervously, feeling uneasy in the deserted village. "If you say so, Skully. But we should be careful. It looks like this place has been abandoned for a while." They made their way through the village, inspecting the dilapidated houses and crumbling stone walls. Skully guided Burt, hoping to find a hidden artifact or relic that could aid in his quest to regain power. As they searched, Burt stumbled upon a dusty old chest hidden beneath a pile of rubble. Excitedly, he called out to Skully. "Hey, Skully! I found something. It's a chest. Do you think there could be treasure inside?" Skully's voice took on an excited tone. "A chest, you say? Quickly." "Burt, open it. There could be something of great power inside." With great enthusiasm, Burt pried open the chest. Inside, they discovered a small, intricately carved wooden box. Burt picked it up, admiring the craftsmanship. "Look, Skully, it's a beautiful box. What do you think is inside?" "Open it, you fool," Skully snapped, his patience wearing thin. "We don't have time to admire its beauty." Burt fumbled with the box, eventually managing to release the latch. As the box sprang open, a sudden burst of energy erupted from within, sending Burt sprawling backward onto the ground. Skully cackled with glee. "Excellent. What have we unleashed, Burt? What sort of magnificent power have we stumbled upon?" Burt, still dazed from the blast, replied, I'm not sure, Skully. But there's a piece of parchment inside the box. Maybe it'll tell us something." Skully urged Burt to read the parchment, as Burt slowly deciphered the ancient writing. A look of concern spread across his face. "Skully, it says that we've just released an ancient curse upon the village, and it can only be lifted by completing a series of challenges." Skully groaned, realizing that he would once again have to rely on the dim-witted farmer to help him in his quest for power. He had no interest in helping the village, and the fact that Burt seemed so determined to do so was nothing short of infuriating. As they trudged along the dusty road, he could see the concern etched into Burt's face, which only added to his annoyance. "Burt," Skully hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Why should we waste our time with these pitiful villagers? They mean nothing to me, and helping them will only distract us from our true purpose." Burt stopped in his tracks, his brow furrowed as he placed his hands on his hips, and looked as stern as he could. "Skully, these people are my friends and neighbors. I've known them all my life, and we've helped each other through good times and bad. They're good, honest folk who've done nothing to deserve this curse." His eyes narrowed, and he took a deep breath before continuing. "I can't just ignore their suffering. We got to help 'em, or I ain't moving another step." Skully's jaw clenched, the flicker of a ghostly flame dancing within his empty eye sockets, as he considered Burt's words. As much as he wanted to dismiss the farmer's sentimental attachment to the villagers, he couldn't deny that Burt had proven to be useful, albeit in a bumbling sort of way. If he refused to help Burt with this task, he risked losing his unwitting pawn in his quest for power. With a frustrated sigh, Skully grumbled his reluctant agreement. "Very well, Burt. We shall aid these villagers of yours. But remember, our ultimate goal is to regain my rightful place as ruler of Grimmdar. Once we have assisted these insignificant mortals, we will continue on our true path." Burt's face lit up, a broad grin spreading across his features. "Thank you, Skully. You won't regret it, I promise. We'll help them out, and then we'll get back to your plans." With that, he clapped his hands together, determination burning brightly in his eyes, and began to stride purposefully toward the heart of the village. As the unlikely pair made their way deeper into the village, Skully couldn't help but see that the thought of being sidetracked by Burt's foolish sentimentality. However, he reminded himself that this was a necessary evil, a small price to pay to ensure that the bumbling farmer remained a useful tool in his dark machinations. As Burt and Skully approached the village, they couldn't help but notice the ominous atmosphere that had settled over the once vibrant community. The streets, usually bustling with laughter and conversation, were now eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of muffled sobs and whispers breaking the silence. The once colorful houses and shops seemed to have lost their luster, now appearing faded and worn under the shadow of the mysterious curse. Burt's concern grew with each step they took, and he cast a sidelong glance at Skully. "Skully, I ain't never seen the village like this before. It's like all the life's been sucked right out of it." Skully, despite his general disdain for the villagers, couldn't deny that the situation was dire. He narrowed his eye sockets, the ghostly flames within them flickering with intensity. "Indeed, Burt, this curse appears to be far more potent than I initially suspected. It will require a significant amount of our combined power to reverse its effects." As they continued their way through the village, Burt began to recognize familiar faces among the afflicted villagers. He saw old Mrs. Appleby, the kindly widow who always baked him pies, her once rosy cheeks now sallow and sunken. He spotted young Timmy, the mischievous boy who loved to play pranks on his fellow villagers, now listlessly sitting on the steps of his home, his eyes vacant and devoid of their usual spark. Burt's heart ached for his friends and neighbors, and his resolve to help them only grew stronger. "Skully, we got to do whatever it takes to help these folks. I can't stand to see 'em suffer like this." Skully, despite his irritation at being dragged into this mess, felt a begrudging sense of responsibility for the curse that had befallen the village. He knew that it was his own dark magic, channeled through Burt's bumbling hands, that had caused this catastrophe. "Very well, Burt. We shall begin our work at once. But first, we must gather more information about the exact nature of the curse." The pair made their way to the village tavern, hoping to find some answers among the weary villagers who sought solace within its walls. As they entered the dimly lit establishment, they could see the despair etched on the faces of the patrons. Hushed conversations filled the air, punctuated by the occasional sob or choked-back tears. Burt and Skully approached the bar, where the tavern's proprietor, a burly man with a bushy beard named Old Tom, was wiping down the counter with a ragged cloth. Burt cleared his throat and tried to sound as authoritative as possible. Old Tom, I'm here to help with this curse business. Can you tell me what's been going on? As Burt spoke, Skully hid himself behind Burt's broad shoulders, knowing full well that if the villagers discovered his presence, it could spell disaster for both of them. Skully trusted Burt to handle the situation, but he couldn't help but keep a wary eye on the patrons, making sure his presence remained unnoticed. Old Tom looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with worry. Burt, it's a nightmare. It is. People are losing hope, and I fear for the future of our village. The curse seems to be draining the life out of everyone, and nothing we've tried has been able to stop it. He paused for a moment, wiping away a tear. If you can do anything to help, we'd be mighty grateful. Burt nodded and replied, Don't you worry, Old Tom. I'll do everything I can to put things right. As they left the tavern, Burt leaned down and whispered to Skully, who is still hidden. We've got our work cut out for us. Skully, let's get started. Skully, grumbling under his breath about the dim-witted farmer's insistence on helping the villagers, reluctantly agreed. Fine, Burt, but we must be cautious. If anyone were to discover my presence, it could be the end for both of us. As they ventured back into the village, Burt and Skully began devising a plan to lift the curse. They would need to gather information about the exact nature of the curse and the source of its power. They would also need to find a way to break it without drawing too much attention to themselves or revealing Skully's presence. Over the next several days, Burt and Skully stealthily went about their investigation. Skully would provide Burt with guidance and magical knowledge from the safety of their hiding places, while Burt would carry out their plans and gather the necessary information. Through a combination of eavesdropping on hushed conversations and examining the afflicted villagers, Burt and Skully were able to piece together a clearer picture of the curse. It seemed to be centered around an ancient relic, long hidden within the village, that had recently been unearthed during a construction project. The relic, imbued with dark magic, had been disturbed, unleashing the curse upon the village. With this newfound knowledge, Burt and Skully knew they had to find the relic and break the curse before it was too late. However, their task would not be easy, as they would need to navigate a web of secrecy and danger, all while keeping Skully's presence a secret. Chapter 4: The Ancient Relic. Armed with the knowledge of the curse's origin, Burt and Skully set out to find the ancient relic that was causing the villagers so much suffering. They knew that they would have to act quickly and discreetly, for the longer the curse persisted, the more desperate the villagers would become. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Burt and Skully ventured out under the cover of darkness, believing it would be the best time to search for the relic without drawing attention. Skully, still hiding from sight, whispered instructions to Burt as they made their way through the village. Remember, Burt, Skully hissed. We must not let anyone see me, or our entire plan could be ruined. Burt nodded, his face a mask of determination. Don't worry, Skully. I won't let you down. After hours of searching through the village, they finally found themselves at the construction site where the relic had been discovered. The area was cordoned off with ropes and warning signs, but that didn't deter the duo. Burt carefully lifted the ropes, making sure not to disturb anything, and slipped under with Skully following closely behind. The construction site was a mess of half-finished buildings and piles of materials. Guided by Skully's knowledge of dark magic, they honed in on a small, unassuming wooden box, half buried in the dirt. Skully's voice trembled with excitement as he instructed Burt on how to carefully unearth the box. As Burt carefully lifted the box from the ground, Skully couldn't help but marvel at the dark power emanating from it. This is it, Burt, he whispered. This is the source of the curse. We must find a way to neutralize its power. Burt nodded, gripping the box tightly. But how do we do that, Skully? Skully thought for a moment, his knowledge of necromancy and dark magic racing through his mind. There is a ritual we can perform. He finally said, It is dangerous, But it is our only hope. We must find a secluded place to conduct the ritual, away from prying eyes." Burt agreed, and the two of them set off to find a suitable location. They eventually came upon an abandoned barn on the outskirts of the village. With the relic in hand, they cautiously entered the barn, making sure not to alert anyone to their presence. Inside the barn, Skully directed Burt to draw intricate symbols on the ground using a mixture of ashes and chalk. Burt struggled to replicate the complex designs, but with Skully's guidance, he eventually completed the task. "Now, Burt," Skully said, his voice tense with anticipation. "Place the box in the center of the symbols and step back." As Burt followed Skully's instructions, the necromancer began to chant in an ancient guttural language. The air around them crackled with energy, and the symbols on the ground began to glow with an eerie, otherworldly light. Burt watched in awe as Skully's chanting grew louder and more intense. The wooden box trembled, and the curse's dark power seemed to be weakening. Just as Skully's chanting reached its crescendo, the box burst open, releasing a blinding flash of light that filled the entire barn. When the light finally faded, Burt and Skully looked around, realizing that the relic's power had been neutralized. The curse was broken. Exhausted but triumphant, Burt turned to Skully with a grin. "We did it, Skully! We saved the village!" Skully, although annoyed by Burt's enthusiasm, couldn't deny the sense of satisfaction that washed over him. He had been instrumental in breaking the curse, even if it was against his will, but he quickly reminded himself that this was just a detour from his ultimate goal of regaining power. "Yes, Burt," Skully replied, trying to hide his irritation. "We have saved the village. Now, can we please focus on our true purpose?" Burt, still beaming with pride, nodded. "Of course, Skully. We'll get back to our quest first thing in the morning." As the sun began to rise, the duo left the barn and returned the now powerless relic to the construction site. They knew that the villagers would soon wake up to find the curse lifted, and life would return to normal. Burt couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had played a part in helping his friends and neighbors. But for Skully, the lifting of the curse was merely a minor victory in a much larger game. He knew that he still had much work to do if he was to achieve his ultimate goal. And as he looked at the simple farmer beside him, he couldn't help but wonder if Burt Plowshare might just be the key to unlocking his long-lost power. As they made their way back to Burt's humble home, Skully began to formulate a new plan. He would use Burt's good-natured spirit and eagerness to help others to his advantage, manipulating the farmer into doing his bidding, while keeping him blissfully unaware of the true nature of their partnership. And so, with the village saved and the curse broken, Burt and Skully continued their journey together, embarking on a series of misadventures and challenges that would test their unlikely alliance and draw them ever closer to Skully's ultimate goal of regaining his lost power. Little did they know, their actions would not go unnoticed, and new threats lurked just beyond the horizon, waiting for the right moment to strike.